We said it's Masculinity Saturday today, and we're joined by Mr. Patrick Obel. Samuel Mungai is still on his way. He'll be joining us later. But before we head into the conversation, I would love to coin this segment, as I mentioned earlier, Masculinity Saturday, as we start the conversation on men and mental health. Last week, Mr. Samuel Mungai, who is a peer counselor and researcher, graced this set to set a precedence for this conversation today. And joining me via Zoom is Mr. Patrick Obel, who is a counselor, and he will help us consolidate the issues around men and mental health and his work also in counseling. But before we get into the introductions, reports have shown that that men are nearly 4 times as likely to commit suicide than women, and are also more likely to die from alcoholism or drug abuse. Statistically, men tend to fall into dangerous self-destructive behaviors rather than seek professional help for their mental health. They may avoid or delay seeking treatment because of concerns about being treated differently or due to perceptions that having a mental health issue diminishes their masculinity. And there's a word that has been used to refer to men who shun expressing themselves, and that is toxic masculinity. Thank you, Sana. Thank you a lot for joining us, Mr. Obel. We'll start with the introductions before we get to defining what toxic masculinity is.
Yeah.
So let's start with
so thank you so much.
Yes.
For the opportunity to be part of this conversation today.
Thank you for
my name is
accepting
Patrick Obel. I work as a counseling psychologist at the United States International University Africa. And that's where I interact with a lot of young people and adults who are dealing with issues of mental health. Thank you once again.
So maybe you can tell us, in part of your work as a counselor, how long have you practiced and how many young men have you been able to inspire and help in your work of counseling?
I've practiced for now how many years? It's many years. Way over 13 years I've been practicing as a counseling psychologist. And so I've seen many people because I've worked in the university setting from around 2012 to date. I've been working at the university. Partly I worked at a different university, that's in Park University. And then now I'm working at United States International University. So that is around 11 years or 12 of working within a university setting with young people. So I've definitely seen so many, I mean, lose count, but I've seen so many young people on matters of mental health.
It's amazing. Yes. It's amazing because we'll be mining that knowledge today, and especially on the issues of Generation Z, that is young people. We're recording extremely high rates of suicide in Kenya, and as we're interacting during the week, some of this could be linked to substance-induced disorders in university and the sherehe life that we have right now. So I just wanted to understand how alcoholism and drug abuse also is involved in the high suicide rates that we're experiencing in Kenya.
Now, let me say this about suicide first, that suicide in itself is not a disease, but a symptom of something that is going on in the life of an individual.
Yeah.
Because when people go through challenges in life, there are diverse challenges that people go through. It could be coming from the family where somebody is coming from. It could be coming from an individual person who has maybe certain expectations that they have laid of themselves, which are not coming through as they hope. And so that could be another source of the problems that they may be interacting with. And so when it comes to the question of alcoholism, now some people have gotten into alcohol because it's something that is socially acceptable in a society. You grew up in a home where your parents take alcohol, and therefore you just join them in as part of what happens.
Yeah.
And so it may not necessarily have been that you got into alcohol because of a problem, but it's something that is a societal issue that we have accepted it generally in some of our communities.
Yeah.
And then it is also a legal drug in our country. So it is something that even if we found you with, of course, if you're above 18, then it's not illegal. I mean, it's fine, it's acceptable. So you see now, because of that, then it exposes young people to alcohol, either from home or because of just the fact that it's a legal substance that people can be able to take. Now, the other thing that I need to mention, maybe that you're asking me, is what would make it a bit more prevalent is that sometimes alcohol becomes a coping mechanism for people who are going through issues.
Yeah.
Because somebody thinks when they take alcohol, it will help me to relax.
Yeah.
It will help me to forget the things that I'm going through. It will help me to be away from the things that are giving me trouble. So because of that, then you find that somebody starts taking alcohol. Now, the problem with alcohol and any other drug is that it is addictive. So one may have gone to take alcohol because it will help them to relax, it will help them to forget certain things, but then alcohol starts gaining root inside them. And once it gains root inside them, then they start developing dependence on alcohol. And once they develop dependence, they may progress on to addiction. And once they get to that now, their body starts demanding for alcohol. Now, they're not taking alcohol because they want to cope with anything, but they're not taking alcohol because their body is demanding for alcohol. And so they have to take alcohol so that they can feel normal again. And so that then becomes an issue.
Now, thank you so much, sir. You have broken it down properly, and we're seeing the second lady, Pastor Dorcas Rigathi, is on the forefront fighting for men and their mental health, and also championing against the use of alcohol and drug abuse. Now, I'm pleased to be joined by Samuel Mungai. Hello, Samuel.
Hello,
How
Tracy.
are you?
I'm good. How are you?
So, before you came, Prof was just telling us, Mr. Obel was talking to us about suicide and the involvement of substance abuse. But before that, I read a little reader on the toxic masculinity, and I'd like to throw it to you gentlemen, and maybe tell me what do you understand by toxic masculinity, because this is a term that has been coined for men who shun their emotions, who shun therapy, and who shun the idea that they have problems. So let's start with you, Mungai.
Thank you so much for having me, Tracy, first of all. Speaking on the subject of masculinity and by extension toxic masculinity, what is it? What is this beast that is toxic masculinity that we all talk about?
Yes.
To a scientific sense, it is attributes or plays where I'd say it encourages violence, it encourages dominance in order to uphold an unequal power dynamic between men and women. I should mention this, this is purely on a gender binary topic. And what it does is it creates a space where men are meant to shun everything, or rather if you identify with a sense of masculinity or masculine traits, you're tending to shun everything that is feminine, which is being emotional, which is moving you away from anything that is considered maleness. So being handsome is considered traditionally maleness. Being, I'd say, muscled up, driven, whereas being feminine is to be docile, to be accepting of said violence. And that also feeds into what is toxic femininity, which is the acceptance of said violence, or rather the silent acceptance of said violence to encourage dominance or hegemonic masculinity or dominance by male in society in order to feel safe. So lastly, it's just purely for men and women and how they seek to navigate society, and for the people who identify with this, I'd say, practice, in essence, if I would call it that, is in order to validate their role in society. So that's a very interesting.
Mr. Bell, what's your take on toxic masculinity? And have you ever interacted with this word? Because it's a so Gen Z word. Mungai can quite relate to it. But maybe if you could help us understand from your point of view what toxic masculinity looks like in the field of practicing psychology.
Now, I know we have lots of terminologies that keep flying around. And it sounds so cool to be able to engage in that kind of space. However, where I see it, I would say that when you talk about something toxic, it's something harmful. So it is a harmful way of relating. Okay, so for me, that is the simple way I would talk about toxic masculinity. Because you see, when you talk about masculinity and femininity, then we are acknowledging the fact that we have people who are different in terms of gender. They are the male and we have the female.
Yes.
And therefore, there is the expectation of how these two should be able to relate. Now, when they relate in a harmful way, and that harm is coming from the male, then that is toxic masculinity, because they are not presenting themselves as they should in a manner that is beneficial and appreciated by the feminine.
Yes, so as I indicated earlier, we set a precedent for this conversation to involve men, because now we're seeing more campaigns for men on alcohol and drug abuse and mental health. And it is the statistics show that the youngest person to take their life was 9 years old, and the oldest was 76. And the largest number of these deaths and attempts was men. So why are more men likely than women to take their own lives? Let's just get into it. I know it's a sensitive topic, but today this is your space, gentlemen. Enlighten us.
Should I go first?
You could go first.
Okay, perfect. First of all, I noticed I did not say this, but hello, Patrick. It's such an honor to be as a panelist along such a, I'd say, seasoned psychologist.
Yes.
Also, just moving it forward, just recent statistics have been showing that close to around, 311 people taking their life, and 77 of that being women, 240 of that being men. Now that's a shocking statistic.
Yeah.
That's something that we should all pay attention to.
Yes.
Regardless of who or whether you're a man or a woman. That's a very shocking statistics. Now, just even breaking it down forward, you're seeing most of those deaths are concentrated within central Kenya. Now, this is where you're finding the more matriarchal society. So, where I was reading up, just around 5 deaths are going on daily, or are happening daily. That is a very, very sad fact.
Yeah.
And some of the causes to this, as I previously or has been mentioned on this show, one, substance abuse.
Yeah.
Now, there's also family factors. If there is a history of mental illness in the family, that can trickle down. There has been reports of it can be hereditary. It can be taken down from parent to child. There's also the factor of life events, rejection, breakup, deaths. These are factors that push individuals towards these kinds of realities. Personality traits. If you're an impulsive person, you're more likely to commit suicide. If you're poor at decision making, poor problem solving skills, and you're looking at some of these issues, is it that the burden has been put on the male, that you have to be the one to come up with all the solutions, you have to be the provider, protector, some of these traditional gender roles.
Yeah.
And on this other hand, there's no one who's your rock. You're not having someone you can lean on to. The effects and the positivity of talk therapy, is that something that should only be exclusive for women? When you're seeing women in their circles, they talk about everything. I don't want to assume, but I have sisters and I've heard them, they talk about everything. We talk about sports, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but maybe we should have a segment where, after talking about sports, let's give 15 minutes to check up on each other. Lastly, I'd like to say there is modeling and stigma. Now, modeling is, when you're looking at the psychosexual stages of development, however way you want to look at it, young people are very impressionable. So the kind of content they consume also affects who they see. So if you idolize someone and they idolize, or rather they speak on suicide as a positive thing, as it was a few years back, the emo trends, they are more likely to commit suicide. So this is one of the reasons as to why men are mostly affected in that nature. And maybe conversations such as this, I applaud you and your studio for bringing up such a conversation. They're very important. Let's not leave the boy child behind. As much as affirmative action is good, what about the boy child?
I agree. Now, Mr. Obel, what's your take on this? You mentioned something very important, Mungai. We'll get back to it on breakup, but let's hear from Mr. Obel first.
I really like what Mr. Mungai has brought out, because that is really, really true about things that happen to men. Now, of course, we talk about adverse childhood experiences. Sometimes you grow up in an environment where there could be violence, there could be something that is not okay. You have observed things that are really not helpful. And of course, because of that, then people go through traumas. And so some of these traumas that you're exposed to may actually now cause trouble in you moving forward in the future days of your life, in addition to maybe what you're saying now, substance abuse, which I want to spend a few more minutes talk about. Now, you see, what happens with substance is that it affects our brain. And you see, once our brain has been affected and how our brain functions, then you find that even how we make our decisions is our judgment is impaired. And just like Mungai is talking about people who are impulsive, sometimes it's because of the impairment in the judgment about the issues of life. And so you find that now people cannot fight matters that they should, because they cannot be able to respond and become resilient to deal with issues and challenges that life brings at them, because they expect things to happen in a particular way. Now, you find that in the generation we're in now, and I'm glad you're talking about the Gen Z, now you find that this is a generation that is being influenced not only with the community around them, but they're being influenced globally. And yet the circumstances that other people are being affected with wherever they are is different from what we have. You know, for example, if you are growing up in Kenya, your father is a Kenyan who grew up with the context that we grew up in, and somebody else is growing up in Germany with a father who has grown up in a tech environment, who has grown up in situations that are not like what we have, and you want to model after such a person, you see your context is already different. Your circumstances are so different, but you want to behave like them. So you find that the young people that are growing right now, they are in a global context, but they're living in a local context. And that is where things are affecting them. And so you find that even looking for role models, if I ask a young person, who's your role model? They'll mention somebody who doesn't even know them. Somebody who lives totally very far away from them. They may not even meet. They don't have enough details, because you see somebody seeing me on TV right now, they don't know where I live. They don't know who I live with. They don't know who I talk to. They don't know anything about me. They're only seeing me right now talking some very big words. And you see, that's what they want to emulate, and they want to become like me. But there is so much that makes me. So that is the challenge that we're having with the generation that we're dealing with right now, because they are living in a local context, but they are operating on a global context. And so that impacts on them. And because, for example, look at how we drink. I'm told, I've never been to the US myself, maybe someday I will. I'm told that when you walk into a bar, they serve you water and they serve you beer. I don't think that happens here.
No.
Okay, but you see, so you'll see somebody drinking and you think they're only drinking beer, but they're also drinking water. But you see, for us, somebody will drink beer and beer, you know, and so there is so much that they're consuming, unlike what is happening elsewhere. So those are the kind of issues that I've observed happening among us. But maybe the other thing I talk about suicide also is that, as I said, that it is not a disease, but it's a symptom. Now, when people do not have mechanisms to deal with their issues and their problems in life, then suicide becomes an option that some people think, because of the myths that have been presented about suicide, that maybe it will get them off from the problems that they're having. And therefore, they don't want to have problems anymore, and therefore suicide becomes an option because they cannot fight the issue. So you find that it is the things that are going on around, and that is why substances actually exaggerate or escalate somebody's inability to make proper judgment on the issues that they're dealing with. And that is why, like Mungai is saying now, men, unfortunately, and maybe we need to work around this, men can meet for many days and talk and know one another, but they don't know where their friends live. But for women, they'll know where they live, they'll know the names of their children, they'll know the name of their spouse, they know how many pets they have. But for men, they may talk about football, but they don't know whether I'm even married or I'm not married, because they don't even talk about personal issues, unfortunately. And yet that is where we find support, that is where we find help from one another.
Like today, Manchester City beat Bournemouth 6-1, but I'm not going to mention that. But, so you mentioned an interesting thing about mechanisms of coping, but I want to get back to that later. I want to throw the question to Mungai. Who's your role model?
Very interesting.
Yes.
Should I just briefly? I'd speak on role models and mentors.
Yes.
Now, role model, my biggest role model is my dad. I look at him and what he's done, and if I live up to be half the man he is, I'll be very impressed. He held together a family, he provided, protected for us. And I'm not saying that he gave us the best life, but you could see, I'm looking at what he's done with what he had, and I am shocked, considering looking at this economy that we're in.
That's amazing.
Secondly, when it comes to mentors, I have a few. I pick my mentors in terms of the fields I'm in. I'm in research as well, I have mentors in research. I'm in project management, I have mentors in project management. I'm also in the church, I have mentors in the church. So not sticking by one person and believing they are the high and mighty deity that will tell me everything that I need to do to become a better person, but emulating the acts and practices of people who've achieved a lot. And I am proud to know.
Mr. Obel, you talked about also role models and the global influence while living in a local context. I'm thinking, are men today, or our young people today, having enough role models, given what you've just explained? And I think I also want Mungai to chime in on that, because we have a lot of the role models from abroad, and they're living all this luxury life, and the Tupac lifestyle, and all of that. Much respect to his memory. But are our young men lacking role models? And where is the voice of the older generation in guiding our younger people today?
Thank you very much, Tracy, for that. I think, yes, there is a challenge about the role models that we are having. I would say, yes, our young people may be lacking sufficient role models. However, we have some that are available that they can be able to look up to. But the unfortunate thing, especially for us in Kenya, and I must say this because I have an opportunity to say so, is that what do we consider as success? Because that has been the challenge. Because success has been considered in terms of material that somebody possesses, regardless of how they acquire that material. Okay, if I came driving a particular kind of a car, living in a particular kind of a home, I would be deemed successful, but nobody will want to know, Patrick, how did you get here? What path did you follow? And so you find that now I cannot be able to, and so I can't be a good role model to somebody because I may not be able to guide them on this path because it is not a straightforward path that I followed. It is not a normative path that you can guide somebody through. It is something that is different. So that could be the challenge, because some of the people that we see around us who are supposedly in both big positions, in successful situations, are those ones that have not gotten there in a path that they can guide somebody. But we have enough people around that young people can still be able to emulate, they can be able to work with, they can be able to seek mentorship and grow through that. But I must agree that it is a challenge because of the perception that we are having of what we need. And that is why you find when the CBC model of, should I say, curriculum got introduced into our country, there are some people who are struggling with that because we are so used to the passing of exams, some of which people have cheated. But you see, you cannot cheat modeling something. And that is why now the CBC hopefully may give us genuine people. Hopefully they can come out as genuine. And that is why when parents struggle to create things for their children, when the children should be doing it, then we are incapacitating that child in their growth. We should allow that child to grow and become what they need to become, because if I create a toy for that child, then what happens tomorrow? They come for a toy from me. Instead of being able to do it for themselves. So that's the challenge, I must agree, that we are able to have role models, but they may not be as many as we wish.
Or maybe, just as you said, what do we consider success? And when young people are looking out they're looking to seek out for role models, they want a certain image. So Mungai, take it away.
I'd honestly totally agree with what Patrick has said. First thing I'd say, it's a needle in a haystack when you're looking for role models and mentors, especially when you're pegging it on maybe traditional values, when you're pegging it on, as is mentioned, success, when you're pegging it in terms of every aspect of your life, from fashion to food, to healthy living, to work, to studying, education, all those things. There are different aspects as to how some of things interact. I'd say when you look at even like affirmative action, there has been concerted efforts toward bringing the girl child out of, or rather eliminating procedural or rather unlawful acts that have continued the systemic oppression or discrimination of a specific gender. Now what we're seeing right now is there's a huge gap between the youth and the elderly. So most people are looking for role models among themselves, among the youth. You're comparing yourself to your classmate. That is something I have fallen victim to, and I'm sure some people have as well. So that's a big problem nowadays. Are we looking to the older generation? Are we just comparing with our younger? And I'd just like to speak as a Gen Z.
I'm so glad that because you're here, I remember this is something I've come under fire as well, and maybe trying to talk to my peers as well. They're saying, how can I guide you? It's like two blind people guiding each other will fall into a ditch. And the people who have come before us who are able to hold our hands.
There's no seasoned experience there. We're all interacting on the same level of knowledge. We need someone who's been in the game. Teach me how to swing a bit.
Now, what are the issues that affect men that would make them not to speak out? That's just one of the questions we have received from our viewers. They're asking, what are the issues that affect men that would make them not to speak out? And maybe, gentlemen, let's put it on the table. What are the issues that men face in this country, especially in this country? And I want to give this context to colonization, and the king was here, and Mr. Patrick, you mentioned something that is very significant, that our reality is not the same as somebody in the US or Germany, because we have different history. So today, what are the issues of men, and also putting that context of the history of our country?
Okay, now, I must say that colonization hurt us in some way, because our definitions of even the success we are talking about here has actually changed a great deal. Now, if you went, and I'll use a community, not because there is anything wrong with that, but you see, if when the colonialists came and found a Maasai man living in a Manyata, it's actually among the Maasai women who build houses.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And so those manyatas are actually built by women. And so you find a Maasai who is living in that place, and they don't have electricity, they don't have so much. You'd call that a poor man.
Yeah.
But that person, in their context, they had their way of life.
Absolutely.
And it is not poverty. It is something that we valued and we appreciated. But you see, now what has come out, and thanks for education, which is a good thing. However, what we are all trained is that now we must go to school, then we can succeed. And that is why we are having a lot of graduates who are unemployed, because their training is go to the university, you will get employed, you will be successful.
Yes.
And so when they have now, so many of them, they have gone to the university, they have come out, and they are not those jobs. And that is why they are giving the government trouble, they are giving all of us problems, saying, give us jobs. We have come from the university. Remember the other day when at Embakasi, people, when they were recruiting the military people, and they were looking for a handful, and then there were so many people who were there, and most of these are university graduates, because that is what the colonization did to us. That there is success in being employed. And I'm glad with the shift of things that are happening right now, because people are now being successful in various ways. Yes. I'm glad people can be able to succeed in just growing with their talent. Yep. Young people are becoming farmers and they're able to succeed. One time I saw a young man who decided that he wants to breed dogs, and that becomes his business because people need security. And he did not necessarily train as a veterinary officer, but he just discovered this is something that I can do because it's something that is needed in my community. Yeah. And for me, I think that is where the colonization hurt us, because of what they're training us, what success is and how we should succeed. However, now with a lot of exposure to the realities of life and what is going on, I think more people are becoming aware that there is a lot more that we can do. And so even the training now in the university, we are training our students and saying, no, you don't need to train to be employed. You can actually be an employer. You can actually create a job out of your own skills that you have learned. And that is a paradigm shift that you are having. So you train to be knowledgeable, to be educated, to be aware, so that you can be able to do something with your life, not to be employed.
Amazing.
But if you get employed, that's okay, but that is not your aim, that I'm training to be employed. But I'm training so that I can make a difference in my life, I can make a contribution in my society, I can become somebody, because you are somebody that you can contribute uniquely into the society. So those are some of the issues that I could observe about colonization and what it has done to us.
Amazing. Mungai.
Heavy questions, yeah. I'd say one thing we like to understand is performative patriarchy and Eurocentric, I'd say feminism.
Break that down. Those are heavy words for viewers.
You asked the question of post-colonial debris. This is an act of post-colonial debris.
Yes.
Even you're looking at, as we were having this conversation offset, obviously, we're talking about the suicide, or rather the criminalization of the penal code and suicide in Kenya. That is a post-colonial act. This is something that a lot of what are these countries called? Countries that were colonized by the Brits.
Protectorates?
Yeah. The Commonwealth.
Commonwealth. Thank you very much. So this is something that's very common among the Commonwealth
countries.
Common among the Commonwealth. Okay, so Eurocentric sense of feminism is adopting radical liberal cultural Marxist feminism, which is very Eurocentric. It's pegged on, or rather pillared on, global North realities. Where in Africa, let's look at our African reality. Sometimes, yes, liberal approaches are all the better, but liberal approaches that are blind to the realities of the ground, blind to the realities of what we go through as Black people, as African people, could also impact the outcome of the issue. So it's something that you also said, and you know, I wrote this down because sometimes I tend to talk a lot. And even understanding this dichotomy between patriarchy and matriarchy. As patriarchy was the problem, does that make matriarchy the solution? I don't know, that's up to the viewers to think about.
And actually next week we'll be having some women talk about women issues. So make sure you tune into that.
I just had one small quote I wanted to read out to the audience.
Go ahead.
It's, and it goes, remove the dams that have only let the boys and the liberated woman seep through, and let them flood the halls of academia, vocational training, sports, leisure, and in some instances, language. That is the only way we can understand when it becomes an approach towards equality of outcome and not just equity or equality.
Can you take that up? Read that again.
The quote goes, remove the dams that have only let the boys and the liberated woman seep through. Let them flood the halls of academia, vocational training, sports, leisure, and language. However that may be, we are seeking an equality of outcome. Not, or rather an equity of outcome, not just equality.
Beautiful. And as we're proceeding with this conversation, of course, sitting as a woman here today, and as we're seeing how there's that imbalance, I'd like us to put, what are the issues now? Let's go to that question. The issues that men are going through today. And maybe Mr. Patrick can also give us context, because I think as Gen Zers, we think that these are new things that are happening and there's no solution and there's a sense of hopelessness happening. So what are the issues that affect young men like you today, Mungai, that would make you not to speak out? Let's start with you and then we go to Mr. Patrick.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Tracy, for that very solid ambush.
Yes.
I'd say there's a lot of societal pressure.
Yeah.
So there's this, I'd say, we're living in the days of struggle. There's someone who once mentioned that our parents, or rather our grandparents, lived through the great wars. I'd say right now we're living through the great war, but it's not a physical war, it's a very mental war.
Yes.
So we're breaking down a lot of barriers that were systematic, that were institutionalized, that were beaten into our grandparents. And that is one of the biggest struggles of the modern young man right now. The contemporary young man, the young adult, that's what we're facing. We're between this push and pull of traditional and modern. Global North, global South. Should I adhere to societal pressure where a man needs to be like this? And you know something very interesting is, I'm seeing a lot of conversation on what a man is coming from people who don't identify as men. Now that's also some of the struggle
You said something interesting. I want to stop you right there. You said identify. Mr. Patrick, please, I would like for you to help us, because now this is what this young man is talking about, identify. Mungai, you want us to deviate from this conversation.
I am just making it very clear. This is for context, honestly. I do not want to open that can of worms when it comes to, you know, gender dysphoria and dysphoria and all those understandings and all those conceptualized frameworks. No, that's not what I'm talking about.
But that's also something we need to talk about, because we have seen statistics on those people who identify being among the highest numbers of suicide and attempted suicidal rate. So, Mr. Patrick will help us with that. Go ahead, guys. Sorry.
I'd say that's something very interesting because some of these issues are just pegged on that. It's all a mental war. Some of these men, what they're fighting is, when it comes to women, they face physical harm, danger. That's something that they walk through life having to think about. And I do not want to say that I am a professional on the plight of the woman. That's not what I'm trying to say. But that's also an added layer of intersectionality of oppression for women. But now for men, I'm saying there's a lot of mental struggle. And that's a big issue, because it feeds also into the suicide rates as well. These attempted suicides. We've had 1,442 attempted suicides. And that's just the ones that are reported. We need to understand there is underreporting and misreporting. Some of the issues that we face, financial freedom. I have friends who are 22 and they've stepped out of the matrix. You know, they're buying their parents' houses and cars, and I'm not saying I'm struggling, but I haven't bought my dad a car yet. So I'm somewhere. There's that. There's also this performative nature where men are expected to present themselves in a certain way. You walk into a room already defeated because they have a sheet. Follow this. Why are you not following this? You're not right. You're not a man. You're not man enough. You cry, you're weak. You're showing attributes that step away, as I mentioned, step away from maleness. You know, you paint your nails, you have long hair, they'll tell you this is, and I'm not saying this is right or this is wrong, but there's a lot of you need to be this rather than how would you like to present yourself and perform your maleness.
Thank you, Mungai. Thank you for that. That was absolutely phenomenal. Now, Mr. Patrick, you've listened to this young man. Maybe shed some light.
Yes,
shed some light. Help us understand.
I love what he's saying. Thank you. I love what Samuel is saying because he is living through it.
Yes.
Now, I'm also living through it, but from the other angle. Yes, because you see now, being a parent at this age now, when things are like this, we are also going through stuff. But let me put it this way, that the Gen Zers that we are dealing with right now, as I said earlier, you'll find that they're living in a local context, but in a global village where there is so much that happens out there. And so when you are thinking of what to benchmark with, it is in a totally different context from what you are really in right now. Now, we are also having a community of young people, should I say this generation, there are people who are actually removed from what some of us grew up in, because we grew up in very well-defined cultures, but now we are living in a very ambiguous culture. Because it's a whole mix of things. You'll find that even for you, your neighbor doesn't speak your local language, if I would use that. And so there's so much that you cannot be able to identify with what they do. Even the kind of food that they eat is not food that you know. And so you find that now we have been mixed up together. And so we are having young people who are actually culture blind, in the sense that they cannot identify even with a particular culture. And so it's a totally global thing that they have caught up with. And so because of that, then you find that even the kind of expectations that we have now, because if Mungai comes from a particular part of this country, there would be very specialized expectations that he would know very well. But he's living in a neighborhood where people have other expectations, so he's also stretched. Now he doesn't know, what are these expectations that I need to meet, those ones or these ones? So there is that mix that he doesn't know now what to define himself with. And so you find that, and that is why we are getting into troubles, that we are trying to fit into a context that is very difficult to define. Because if it was something that is very easy to define, then it would be very easy for you to know when you meet this, you meet this, you meet this, then you have been able to score the goal that you need to score. But when there is a shifting base, if I would say there is a shifting goal post, today it is this, tomorrow it is that. Today it is because you have gotten this university degree, tomorrow it's because, you can be able to afford this. Tomorrow is because, no, you have been able to travel to this number of countries. You've been able to do it. So you find that there are so many shifting goalposts that are making it so difficult for the Gen Zers, both male and female, but for the men more specifically, if I would say, is also maybe from the very empowered female around them. And so you find that these young men, even the competition that they're having in the resources available has shifted, because there is so empowered girls or empowered women, empowered female, and yet this young man is expected to do so much with very limited opportunities. So that now also becomes a challenge, because he has a double struggle. There's already a struggle just being a young person, but there is a bigger struggle because you're a male. And so that now creates a very unique challenge for these young men that we are dealing with around us right now, because they have double struggles, there are challenges that they're having, they're in a culture-blind society, there is an ambiguous environment, so they don't know which standards they're meeting. Is it a standard that is global? Is it a standard that is local? Is it a standard that is cultural? So the standards are mixed up. So that becomes a challenge, and this young person is growing in an environment where if he doesn't settle down and ask himself, what do I really want with my life? What do I really want with myself? How do I now redefine that? so that he can be able to pass through a path that he can be able to measure himself in a manner that he can succeed and succeed well without the pressure of what is expected from other places. So for me, I see our young men are being faced with some of those challenges. And so like Mungai was saying that we talk about suicide, there is a lot of suicide that is undocumented. Yeah. Because there are some accidents that are a product of suicide. But you see, you'll report it as an accident. Yeah. Exactly. You can't say it's a suicide. So it is true that suicide is underreported because there are many other things that happen that we cannot say they're suicide, but they are actually a suicide. Somebody, we may say they were drunk, okay, or maybe they were intoxicated. Yeah. But actually, there was a suicide component to that. But you can say, oh, but they're intoxicated, they fell through something, or there was an accident of some. So many accidents actually are actually suicides, but we may not tell because they don't come out in that manner, and maybe there is no suicide not left behind. So we cannot say, oh yeah, that was suicide because this is what they said before they died, or when they died, this should happen. And so that is also underreported. So we cannot be able to tell. But that is what I would say in response to what you have. Maybe I can say much, much later.
That is brilliant, Mr. Obel. I want to give Mungai a few moments because my producer is telling me we run out of time. I wish we could delve into this more, especially as an empowered female. I'm sitting here interviewing two gentlemen with a wealth of knowledge. I do agree with a lot of what you said. I'm not going to say most, a lot of what you said. So, Mungai, take it away as we finish.
Yeah, just briefly, there are two main things that Patrick said that I want the listeners to hone in on specifically. One, and I wrote them down so I don't forget and don't speak too much, if you'll allow me. Guests as well. So, culture blind and shifting goalposts. Yes. Now, in terms of culture blind, there's a lot, especially with this podcast era, you're seeing a lot of imposition, or rather, trickle down from the global north. Now, we were seeing where men are being told, this is how you need to act. Yeah. But the context is in what? It's in the US, the context is in France. Yeah. Where these people locally, and even locally we have our, I'm not going to mention names, but we know our commentators and the people who push that. But also on shifting goalposts, and this is something that's very big, and it ties in with something I wanted to speak on hypergamy and the empowered female. So right now when you're looking at what affirmative action has done in Kenya, it's pushed for disenfranchising the woman, empowering the woman, but it presents an empowered, qualified, educated, cultured young lady that the man has no idea what to do with.
No prospects.
So where is the hand-holding for this boy, or rather coaching, to make sure this man or this boy develops into a man that can actually deal and add and pour into the cup of this empowered woman? Now that's a struggle, and even it shows in hypergamy where you're being told a woman will leave you for the next best man, and you're living in fear because will what I'm doing today ever be enough? That's a question all men ask themselves.
Wow. And we didn't tackle the issue of heartbreak, but Mr. Obel, I'm going to give you this last opportunity because of this hopelessness that we seem to be experiencing with our young men and the empowered female. Honestly, I wish I could have you back to talk to the women I'm going to invite, young women I'm going to be inviting next week. So just this hopelessness, as Mungai is talking about, I feel I don't know why I feel so close to this. Also because we're trying to look at the balance and the equality of the genders, yeah? So maybe just in a few words to the young men who are listening to you to handhold them as Mungai talks about.
Now, thank you. Now, Mungai is using very profound information here, and thank you for the research that you've done. Because when you say that the woman will leave for the next best man, so I wonder what best here is. Because, exactly. Because as a person who has mentored people, who has talked to people on matters of relationships, I think what I would say here is the big thing is understanding and empathy, because when I engage with this woman, do I empathize with her situation as what is she looking for? What is she like? How is she feeling about what I'm dealing with? Because I'll tell you this out of experience, again, engaging with different people, that in as much as we want to define success in terms of material, but you will find that you have this much material, but that is not all that makes life. there is a lot more that makes life that you need. Because I believe, Tracy, should you be the type that wants to get married and have a husband and have children, you'd want a man that will help you raise your children.
Absolutely.
Not a man that throws money at you and disappears.
Absolutely.
So there is much more, so there is much more in what this relationship is than the material that we have made it to be.
Yeah.
And so I think this hopelessness that maybe the young men are feeling, much of it is that they do not seem to have a lot of material. Unfortunately, if the woman is also looking for so much of that material, then for a fact you cannot match.
Yeah.
But if you are looking into a relationship beyond the material, that it is a lot more that you bring in than what the material is, then you realize that you can still make it together. Because think of opportunities. Now, if two of you graduate from a university and you are both qualified with a particular degree and you are employed by different employers, and maybe the woman is employed by an employer that can pay 3 times the employer of the husband can offer. Now, the man will earn less, not because they are less qualified, but it's because of the opportunity and who it is that has employed them. And so if you're saying, no, you're not bringing in a lot, then you're saying, okay, you should have been employed where I'm employed so that you can bring in the same. But those are the opportunities that we are talking about.
Wow.
So there is a lot more that we bring in the relationship than how much we bring in materially. And so the young men that we have, you should value yourself in terms of, you are not money, you're not material, you're a human being. And there is a lot more that you can bring in a relationship than the money that somebody wants you to bring. Thank you.
That was Masculinity Saturday. Honestly, I feel that I'm shortchanging the young people, the young men of this country, by not having more time for Mr. Patrick and Samuel. Thank you for the wealth of knowledge you've given us tonight.